the 11th chapter, 2 Corinthians 11. When you get there, say amen.
Amen. You got this?
It'll be before
Is it
the T's, before the Titus and Timothy, the first and second Timothy, and it'll be before the T's. So if you see those, you've gone a little too far.
Amen. Say amen.
Let's Corinthians what?
2 Corinthians chapter 11. I was going to bring a song to play tonight. Have you ever heard that song, Sometimes It Takes a Mountain? It says in that song, it says, sometimes it takes a mountain. Sometimes a troubled sea. Sometimes it takes a desert to get a hold of me. Let's think about that this evening. As we go into the service here, let's think about sometimes it takes a mountain. I don't know how many of you were here a few weeks ago. I preached a sermon, and I preached a sermon on Peter. And I said that there was an old saying, not to judge a man until you walked a mile in his shoes. So we walked a mile that night in the shoes of Peter. Now, I want to do the same type of thing tonight. I want to kind of take a little journey and walk in another man's shoes, but tonight I want to walk in the shoes of Saul of Tarsus. He was from a town called Tarsus, and his name was Saul. Now, Saul was brought up as a Pharisee. And Pharisees were the ones that kept the religious laws. They were the religious leaders that was in charge of seeing that people kept to the laws of Moses when it came to religious things. They were the ones responsible for arresting the people and seeing that they were punished for not following the laws. So Saul was a very loyal man. So we're going to be Saul. We're going to put ourselves in his place. Now Saul was very loyal to his belief. What he believed in, he stuck strongly to it. And he believed that the Christians were making a mockery of religion. He believed that they were blaspheming against God. They were following a man that claimed to be the Messiah. And he saw that he felt that this man was a false prophet. So Saul would go around and arrest Christians and put them in jail. And they would give them a trial. Well, Saul, you've heard of a man in the Bible called Stephen. He was a young man, and he was a follower of Jesus, and he was preaching the death and resurrection of Jesus. And Saul was one of those in charge of capturing him, and they brought him before the council, and they found him guilty of doing things against God because he was preaching Jesus, and he was ordered to be stoned to death. And if we're Saul, and we were the one that took him in there, the one that's responsible for seeing that his punishment is carried out, that he's put to death, and we're standing there holding his garments while they're stoning him. And they stoned Stephen, and Stephen looked up, and he said that he saw a door open to heaven, and he saw Jesus standing there on the right hand of God looking down. that's when Stephen died. They said, well, there's a big movement going on over in Damascus. And they have all of these Christians that are stirring up a stink or causing problems over there. So Saul's going to go over there and clean them up. He's going to go over there and arrest him and do what he can. He gets the high priest to write him a letter giving him permission to persecute these Christians. So Saul's on his way to Damascus, and on the way there, there's a bright light that comes up and it knocks him off his horse in the middle of the road. And Saul sees Jesus. Now Jesus had been crucified, and Jesus had been resurrected. And here's a guy that's against the Christians, and he's doing it with all of his heart. He believes that he's doing the right thing. He believes that he's doing the work of God. So Saul struck down off of his horse on the road to Damascus. Jesus appears to him and says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Anyway, Saul is blinded, and he can't see anything, and his men have to carry him on into Damascus. This man gets there. There's a prophet or a man of God in the city of Damascus named Ananias. And God speaks to Ananias and says that Saul of Tarsus is here and he's blind, and I want you to go over there and give him his sight back. And he said, Ananias said, Saul of Tarsus, he's the one that's going around killing all of us, putting us in jail and putting us to death. And you want me to go heal this man? Well, in the book of Acts, I'm going to read a couple of verses out of that real quick. In chapter 9, verse 15, he says, But the Lord said unto him, Go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. I want us to remember that tonight. What great things he must suffer for my name's sake. The man, Saul of Tarsus, changed his name from Saul to Paul. That man is known as Paul, the Apostle Paul. Paul became, when he changed his belief from the old ways, the old Pharisees thinking that he was brought up on, to the Christian way of thinking, he became loyal to Jesus. So loyal that no matter what happened, he was going to stay loyal to Jesus. He was just as loyal in his new life as he was in his old life. Paul, the apostle, wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. This was a man that was killing the Christians and persecuting the Christians. Now he's gone the other way. Paul was a powerful man in God's eyes because he was so loyal to God. But he didn't have it easy. Because now he's among the ones that are being persecuted. He's among the ones that are being thrown in jail, the ones that are being put to death. And he's out there pushing his weight around. And he's not afraid to tell anybody about Jesus, no matter what it costs him. Let's take a little look at 2 Corinthians here, where I told you to go. Chapter 11. And let me see here. Let's go down to verse 23. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more in labors, more abundant in stripes, above measure, in prisons more frequent, in deaths often. Now, he said he was more abundant in stripes. When the Bible talks about stripes, it's talking about the marks that are left behind from you being whipped with a whip. The stripes that are cut into your skin. Paul, because of his preaching and his teaching, on more than one occasion had been whipped for it. He said there that often the stripes above measure, in prisons more frequent. A lot of the books of the New Testament he wrote while he was sitting in prison. And he would be thrown in prison and he would eventually get out. He'd go back to his preaching and his teaching. And he was preaching and teaching by writing letters to the churches and the different ones while he was in prison, and he'd be thrown in prison again. He said that in death, often, Paul was stoned and thrown outside the gates as dead and left out there as dead. And the angels come and help Paul and save his life. But he was left there for dead, so he knew what he was talking about. He said, of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. That means 40 minus 1, it means 39 stripes. When they whipped a man as punishment for something, they used a whip.
They didn't just whoop them, they beat them.
They beat him. They used a whip that was called cat of 9 tails.
Yeah.
It had 9 parts that come out that had knots and sometimes razor blades on the end of it that would take chunks out of your skin. They said that if you were to whip a man 40 times with that he would die. That was their belief. So they would only give him 39 lashes, 1 lash away from death. So that's why he says 40, save 1, 40 less 1. So Paul, because he was out there preaching, because he was following God, had been whipped by this and had these stripes and these scars on his back. He says here 5 times. Now at this point, in the letter to 2 Corinthians, Paul hadn't finished his ministry yet. Paul's ministry was approximately 32 years from the time he got saved on the road to Damascus. From the time that Jesus appeared to him, it was approximately 32 years before his death. So he's out there preaching and teaching for 32 years. Jesus was crucified at the age of 33. So it's very close. His ministry, the length of it, is very close to the whole life of Jesus in the flesh here. Anyway, he said that 5 times he had received these beatings because he was following Christ. And there's times I cry over something small that's happening in my life. But this is what Paul went through. The man that was persecuting Christians, the man that was putting them in jail, the man that was putting them to death. Now he's suffering for Christ, for God. Like the song, sometimes it takes a mountain, sometimes a troubled sea, sometimes a desert to get a hold of me. Sometimes God has to put these things in our lives to get our attention, to get a hold of us. But 5 times. He says thrice, that's 3 times was I beaten with rods. So on top of being beat with the whip, 5 different occasions, there were 3 occasions where they hit him with rods, with staffs, wooden staffs. Once was I stoned, I told you about that. 3 times, thrice I suffered a shipwreck. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In one of these shipwrecks, he's out there in the middle of the sea, and all night long and all the next day, he's out there swimming. Come on. To stay alive. man, this guy's had some bad things going on in his
Oh,
life.
man.
And I want to complain because something tastes bad. I want to complain because I'm cold. I want to complain because I'm sweating a little bit. I've had some bad things in my life, but I didn't suffer the things that this man had suffered. Why was he suffering them? Because he was following God. Because he was preaching the resurrected Jesus. Because he had witnessed the resurrected Jesus with his own eyes on that road to Damascus. 3 times he was in a shipwreck. Like I said, this was not the end. He still had more years in his ministry. Later on, Paul is arrested and they're taking him to Rome. And back then, a lot of times he traveled by boat. This was before the shipwreck that we read in the book of Acts about, on the way to Rome. He's in a shipwreck there, and all of the people are hollering on the boat, screaming that they're going to die. And Paul tells them that God told me that nobody's going to die in this shipwreck. They end up on an island in this shipwreck, and Paul ends up getting bit by a snake. So he's been bitten by a snake. He's been in at least 4 shipwrecks. He's been beaten with rods. He's been beaten with whips. But yet, he never once stopped talking about Jesus. As a matter of fact, there's stories in the Bible where Paul is arrested, and while he's talking to the ones that arrested him, while they're asking him questions and stuff, he's preaching to them. He's telling them all about Jesus. The ones that arrested him because he's talking about Jesus. He's telling them, you need to follow this Jesus. You need to learn about him. You need to learn what he did for you. You need to realize that he's the true Messiah. He's teaching this stuff and preaching it to the ones that arrested him for doing it. In journeyings often, in perils, in waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by my own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren.
What is perils?
Perils is in troubles.
Okay.
Things, bad things happening to you. In danger. If you're in peril of something, you're in danger of. When he says in perils of robbers, he traveled the roads. As a matter of fact, like I said, they had to travel by boat and by foot. They didn't have cars and trucks and buses and planes. In fact, by the end of his life, Paul was something like 3,000 miles or 2,900 something, right at 3,000 miles away from where his journey started. That's a lot of walking and riding in boats. And on those roads at night, there's people out there that's traveling that have run out of food and stuff, and they're hungry and they're willing to rob somebody or even kill them if they have to get their food or money or whatever they can off of them. So he was in peril of robbers. He was in danger of being robbed all the time. He spent nights sleeping on the road, on the side of the road. Using a rock for a pillow. Jesus had to do that in his traveling as well. There was times that he was cold. Paul, when he was a Pharisee, he was taken care of. Because he was a religious leader, the people kept him in clothes, they kept him in food. When he gave all that up to follow Jesus, there was times out there that he went hungry because he didn't have any money. He made money by making tents. He learned how to make tents, and he was a tent maker, the Bible tells. And I don't know how much money a tent maker makes, but I'm sure it wasn't a lot of money. And he's spending a lot of his time doing the preaching and the teaching. And I believe that a lot of that he done while he was making tents. But there was times that he went without eating. There was times that he was cold in the night. He was hot in the day. He was wanting for food and clothes. He was suffering in all of this. Through all of this, he never once gave up on Jesus. He went through a whole bunch of things. And he tells in verse 33 that through a widow in a basket, he was let down by the wall and escaped his hands. When Paul got to Damascus after being on the road there, the men and stuff that was with him went back and told their leaders that he's gone and joined these Christians. And they sent these people out after him. So when Ananias came and gave his sight back to him, Paul was in danger. They wanted to capture him. They were probably going to get him for blasphemy and stone him like Stephen was stoned when Paul captured him. This widow put him in a basket and let him down over the wall so that he could escape, to get away from the enemies and then wanted to kill him. There was a point where they wanted to kill him so badly that they sent out an army of something like 500 men to track him down and bring him in so they could put him to death. And his nephew came to him and said, Paul, they just sent out an army of 500 men and they're looking to kill you. That was God's way of warning Paul ahead of time so he could escape. So there was a lot of times that Paul was right on the edge of death. But God pulled him out of it because he wasn't through with it yet. So Paul did not have an easy life. We do not always have an easy life. We talked earlier about if we didn't suffer things, if bad things didn't happen to us, then what would we have to praise God about? If everything always went smoothly, if He made our life always without any kind of troubles or situations in our life, we would have no reason to praise Him because everything's perfect. A lot of preachers preach, especially on TV and stuff, about how great and wonderful your life will be if you follow God and Jesus. They make it sound like if you turn yourself over to God, you're not going to have any more problems in your life. You're going to have all the money that you want. You're going to have all the food you want. You're not going to have any problems. Like I said, if that was the case, we would all go to church one time. And we would go to the altar and get saved, and we wouldn't have to go to church anymore because things would be perfect. Why would we praise God if things are always perfect? Sometimes He has to put a mountain in front of us.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to be on a troubled sea and then a shipwreck. Sometimes we got to float for a night and a day in the deep waters, treading for life. Sometimes we have to cross the desert with no water. Every one of us have been through something in our life. Some of us through worse things than others. But the fact that we're sitting here talking about it tonight, right now, means that God brought us through whatever it was. Do you know God was looking out for me even when I wasn't following Him?
Yeah.
There was times that I came close to a situation that I could have died. But somehow I made it through it. Somehow it didn't happen. Because God wasn't finished with me yet. He had something for me to do. The same thing with Paul. He wasn't finished with him yet. Even when he wrote all of this, there was more suffering down the road for him. think it was 2 Timothy was the last book, the last letter that Paul had wrote. And he says at the end of that he had run the race. He had won the race. And that he had stuck to it until the end. Because of all the things he suffered and all the things he went through. And there's more things than what is told right here. If you actually read all the places in the Bible that talks about the Apostle Paul. And I'm certain there's a lot of things that have bad things that happen in Paul's life that didn't make it into the Bible. Not everything not all the miracles Jesus performed are listed in the Bible. As a matter of fact, it said if they were to list all the miracles he performed during his lifetime when he walked here in the flesh, that the world couldn't contain a book big enough. The whole world couldn't contain it. So I'm sure that Paul went through a lot of bad things that are not even mentioned in here. There's a lot of them that I've heard of. He said in verse 32, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is blessed forevermore, knoweth that I lie not. Now, Paul wasn't telling them these things to uplift himself. You know, some people will tell you about all the bad things in their life just for the fact that they want you to feel sorry for them. They'll complain about things because they want you to go boo-hoo. And sometimes they'll tell you all these things that they made it out of, these fights or scraps that they've been in and won, to make themselves look big and good. But Paul was telling them, I'm not telling you this to glorify myself. I'm telling you this stuff because I want to glorify Jesus. I want to glorify God who brought me through all of this. All of this suffering, all of this pain. There's a place in there where he prays to God and he says, I got a thorn in my side. Now, there's been a lot of arguments over what that thorn was. It's not an actual thorn. It means that he had something in his life that was bad going on right then. And he wanted God to take it out of his life. It could have been something spiritual. He could have been having a spiritual battle. It could have been something physical that was wrong with him. Some people believe that it was his eyesight that he couldn't see very well because of when he'd been blinded on the road to Damascus. I don't buy that because if God sent a man to heal him and God healed him, God's not going to heal him partially. Some people says that it was something like tuberculosis or something like that. It could have been a physical ailment. It could have been a spiritual ailment. Whatever it was, the answer God gave him was, my grace is sufficient. In other words, whatever it was that was troubling Paul at that point, God pretty much said, grin and bear it. Because my grace to you is sufficient enough. You don't need that removed from your life. It's there as a reminder. It's there for a reason. Yeah. I gave a sermon just a little while ago on Jacob. And when he wrestled with God, and they touched his hip and knocked his hip out of joint, and the rest of his life he was maimed and crippled. And he walked with a limp. Now, God caused the injury. God could have healed it. But he left Jacob like that the rest of his life, so he would always remember that battle. Paul went through a lot of things, but like I said, he never glorified himself. He never bragged about it. Whenever he told about the bad things in his life, God brought me through this. It was the love of Jesus that saved me from these shipwrecks. At least 4 that we know of. It was the love of Jesus that brought me out of the deep after spending a night and a day there. It was the love of Jesus that saved me from the snake, the poison of the snake. It was the love of Jesus that the 5 times I was beaten with a whip that healed me and brought me out of that. The 3 times that I was hit with a rod. Now it just says a rod. I said it earlier, it was a wooden rod. It could have been metal. It just says rod. But most staffs that people carried in were wood. You ever been hit with a baseball bat? By accident even? I played Little League, and I remember a batter swinging, and I was the catcher, and let go of the bat, and the bat hit me in the chest. And I had a pad on my chest, but it still knocked the breath out of me to where I couldn't breathe, and I laid on the ground gasping for breath, and it still hurt. I've been hit with a bat in a fight before, a wooden stick, and it left a bad black and blue mark. And it hurt for days and days. And there was 3 different times that he was beat with a rod. And there's no telling how many times they hit him with that rod. You know, when they beat him with the whip, he said that it was 39 lashes. He didn't say how many times they hit him each time with the rod, but on 3 different occasions. He was stoned, thrown outside of the city like trash, left for dead. Jesus, the love of Jesus came along and brought him through it. No matter what we complain about in life, I'm sure Paul's seen most of what we have seen and went through something similar or worse. So let's just remember that it's the love of Jesus that brought him through all of this. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go over here to the altar, and I'm going to thank God for all the things he's done for me, all the blessings he's given me. But I'm going to thank God also for all the bad times I've gone through in my life, because as a testimony, I'm standing here today to show that I survived. And by the testimonies, by the trials that I go through, God shows his power to me. And it reminds me not to get too arrogant, and reminds me that he's there to bring me through it. So right now I'm going to open the altar so we can thank him for these things. And tell me, righteous Father, we put your name in my life. Father, I want to thank you for all the blessings you've given me in my life. Father, for the times that you saved me from hunger.